let's get started. To begin with, I want to thank everybody and welcome everyone for coming tonight. We're very excited about this opportunity. My name is John Becker. I'm the president of Red Wing Downtown Main Street, and myself and several of my contemporaries in the Red Wing community, Mark Abramson, Art Kenyon, Nancy Kafka, Valerie Becker, Elise Howell, Mark Abramson, did I miss? Emily, John Andrews. A fair number of us have been meeting on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. We were awarded an Idea Slam grant earlier this year from the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation. And our project goal was to try to get a metric of the local creative economy. In other words, how much of our economy is due to creative elements. And so this has been this is a very large problem. It's a difficult to define problem. So it's been very much a challenge. As part of this process, and this is part of the process, and our final report will be finished next week. September 1st is our deadline. As part of this process, this is the public presentation portion. And this is the first of several dialogues that we hope to have to kind of engage the community, get some feedback about the creative economy and how the Red Wing community, and when we talk about the Red Wing community, we're talking about the broad, kind of loose definition of the Red Wing community. So it's everything around Lake Pepin. It's much broader than just the city of Red Wing. So tonight, and nobody's here to listen to me, so I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick, but tonight we have two special guests. Jack Becker, no relation. Jack is the founder and executive director of Forecast Public Art. It's a 34-year-old Twin City-based nonprofit. It's focused on public policy and public art issues. Jack works on projects all across the country, and he's got a kind of a long history on public art issues, what public policy has been towards public art. And so we're really looking forward to hearing what Jack has to say. And he's been doing this for a long time. Jack's colleague tonight is Gugun Kayin. And I know I'm butchering her name, but Gugun is the Director of Arts and Culture at the City of Minneapolis. She's involved very much in doing the same thing that we're trying to do, in coming up with a creative economy index for the City of Minneapolis, so that they have something to measure themselves against going forward. And so they have an idea of what their economic health is as far as the creative economy is concerned. Gugun has been with us. Gugun actually created her own job description within the city of Minneapolis. That's how important the city has felt this could be to the city of Minneapolis. And a lot of communities are beginning to recognize that the real economic value of creativity and what it can mean to their community. And it all comes down to return on investment. There's just a tremendous payback for creative endeavors in a community. And I can cite two very obvious ones. One is this location itself, where we're at. The Anderson Center is a world-class example of creative placemaking. It's just in the immediate investment that the Anderson Center has made with the barn restoration project is probably going to pay back something in the order of 5 to 6-fold. So there's that immediate economic payback. And then there's the trickle-down payback. And the Flyway Film Festival in Pepin, Wisconsin, it's a very small project. It's a $15,000 film event. And the Wisconsin Tourism Bureau has measured that as having an economic payback on the order of $120,000. So these kinds of, and not to mention the livability and the positive feng shui that having a vibrant and active, creative community does for a community. So, unless there are any questions, we're going to go right into this. Jack will present. We'll begin with a presentation, and then Gugun will follow with her presentation, and then it'll be more open to discussion. We really want to solicit feedback from the audience So it's going to be very informal in that respect. So, without any further ado, oh, I'm sorry, of course. How could I forget? This is being moderated tonight by Randy Olson. Randy is new to the community, and this is a terrific opportunity for you to meet Randy. Randy is the new executive director of the Red Wing Port Authority. Randy has responsibility for making sure that we have a strong economy locally. So we're here to help Randy. We're here to make Randy successful, because if Randy's successful, we're all going to be successful. So Randy's back there, and he'll be taking over here shortly. Jack, do you want to take it away from here?
Great, thank you. Well, it's great to be here. I love Red Wing. And it's great to see such a great turnout. That's really heartening for me. Here's the thing. I've got a lot of slides to show you. I'm not going to explain every slide. I thought it would be better to just give you an aerial view of what's going on in public art, say a few words about what I believe are important issues going on in the field, and look at some trends, and try and wrap up in 20 minutes in time to have maybe more of a dialogue with you and answer questions that you have before we get into the next presenter. So thinking about public art and creative communities, first a little bit about Forecast. So our mission is to strengthen and advance the field of public art. We think about it locally, nationally, and even internationally. And the main focus of our activities is to expand participation, support artists, inform audiences, and assist communities. And we do that in three ways. We have this magazine, Public Art Review. Hopefully you got a copy. I brought a box, and I hope that you can enjoy that on your own afterwards. It's published twice a year. We've been doing it for 23 years now, and it's distributed nationally and internationally. We have a consulting program where people hire us to actually help them develop public art master plans or streetscape improvements, or to find the right artist for, say, a new development or a public library. And our Artist Services program has a statewide grant program for individual artists. And that's 23 years old now, funded by Jerome Foundation and the McKnight Foundation. And it gives support to individual artists who want to explore the public realm on their terms at sites of their choosing anywhere in the state. So it's a pretty unique grant program in the country, including funding for research and development of ideas, as well as public projects. And the next deadline for our grant program is coming up November 15th. So any of you artists in the room? How many artists do we have here? Oh, great. You should consider applying. And really, you're all artists, as you're going to learn through my conversation with you tonight. If you're not the artist creating the work, you're the audience that's receiving the work. And my feeling is that without the audience, there is no public art. So you're part of the equation. If we look nationally, there's some 350 public art programs run by cities, counties, or state agencies. And that doesn't include the nonprofits and the art on campus programs and many other individual efforts that are going on around the country. As you can see, there's a lot on the east and west coast, not so much in the middle of the country, but Minnesota is a stronghold in this field. When I think about public art, we think about the monuments, the commemorative, the awesome sculptures that make and identify our cities, from New York to DC to Minneapolis. We think about trying to define public art. It's often a quandary for a lot of people. The private act of an artist creating is butting right up against the idea of a very public forum. And it's a negotiated art form. It's a field of inquiry, not unlike science or medicine, in which artists are exploring the public realm, trial and error, cause and effect. They're the specialists, and they're the general practitioners. I think Michelangelo was a GP. And of course, there are cities that are known for their public art. It's the signature of their community. Where are we here? Does anybody know? Okay, and if you notice the date on this, 1937. That's pretty phenomenal. This could probably be in any urban setting. This is a mishmash, okay? One slide doesn't necessarily lead to another. It's like, and now for something completely different. That would be a good subtitle for a public arts slideshow. Going from permanent works to temporary, to upside down structures, to entrances to subway stations in Paris, to graffiti art, to street murals, to incredible aerosol murals, and photographic images on gigantic scale. Of course, there's memorials. This is a Robert F. Kennedy Memorial in Los Angeles, near the site where he was shot. This is a sculpture park in Shanghai, a parking garage in Minneapolis, a mural called Before I Die by Candy Cheng. This is the artist who created this wonderful concept. You fill in the blanks with chalk that's provided. What is it you want to do before you die? And everybody has their own answer, but you get to see everybody's answers, and it gets added to regularly, and then erased and added to again. Public art with balloons. Public art with trees. Public art with grass on the walls. Fabric curtains running for 20 miles through California by the artist Christo. Have any of you seen the Running Fence documentary? It's a fabulous film documenting this project. And Christo and his wife Jean-Claude took over the paths in Central Park with these gates for Central Park. Public art can be art in public places as well. You could set up a gallery along a path in a park, or a piano by a street. Art can be interactive. It can suggest interactivity. It can be very simple and maybe uninspiring, or be awe-inspiring. It can be very simple and low budget and personal, like a portable puppet show on the streets of Chicago, or a repurposed corn crib filled with colored nylon rope, which at night, with solar-powered lights, this suggests that public art is really about experiences, and what kind of experiences can artists create for audiences. Recycling a playground structure from the 60s into a monumental landmark artwork. Artists working with high school students in Bemidji to create an earthen mound and a gathering place. Artists working with young people in Lanesboro to create historic markers and medallions that were placed around the city. Or in Northfield, temporarily strung over the river. Interactive technology now is enabling artwork that by touching the railing, you're controlling the colors and the lights that are hanging. Or taking over vacant storefronts. Or treating the infrastructure that we take for granted. This is by Stan Sears and Andrea Michaelbus, who are artists in the region, working with community in the north side of St. Paul. MnDOT's going to replace the bridge. What can we do that's not the typical bridge? Let's add some form liners, custom form liners, to create concrete reliefs along the edge. To seating elements, this is in the midpoint between Minneapolis and St. Paul, and it's called Sibling Rivalry. This one's in Florida, not a big surprise. I love the suspense, though. He doesn't seem to know that he's about to be hit by a tsunami. A grotto in a public workstation in Kent, Washington, seating along the streets in St. Paul, 1,000 green chairs on the front lawn of the state capitol for just one day to get people to sit together and engage in conversations. Drinking fountains can be public art. Flatbed trucks can be stages for performance events. Any of you participated in a flash mob event? This is an umbrella flash mob event by the Twins Stadium. They were all singing in the Rain, even though there was no rain. I'm sure the Twins fans thought they were crazy. And now with new technology, there's a way to get information about public art where you are on site, which is a huge revolution in terms of the ability to educate people about what is the public art they're looking at, because most of us have no idea. The signs don't tell you the whole story. So the fact that now, with this location device, this smartphone technology, there's all kinds of content that can be added, and the phone knows where you are. So it can say that mural that you're standing in front of happens to be, and explain the work. The artist can be interviewed, and you can hear an audio guide to what was the artist thinking about creating this work. So I'm going to leave this slide up and talk a little bit, and lead to a few sort of final points that I wanted to make for you. So there's this guy, speaking of this technology, there's this British creative technologist named Alfie Denon, who started up this new big art mob, and it's currently in beta mode. You're going to hear about it. It's launching next week. But it's allowing people to take pictures of art and load them on a global map platform that he's created called the Big Art Mob, so that any pictures of public art that people find can be shared online, which I think is a great idea. He defines public art very broadly. He says, any work in public view created by a person or group whose aim was to create what they believe to be art, irrespective of genre or style. I think of this field of inquiry and these specialists, such as muralists or sculptors, and these general practitioners who can move from one project to another or one medium to another, and it's more about the idea and not a particular medium. And public art is a process as much as a product. And artists engaged at the table with public, urban planners and city council and neighborhood groups and corporations and businesses and cultural tourism boosters. So given our history, 34 years working in the field and publishing Public Art Review, I get invited to do speaking talks at a variety of places around and talk about the trends and issues in the field. And I often hear from planners and elected officials asking me to address the economic benefits of art in the public realm. And sure, there's money involved. In fact, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent annually in the US alone. And there are cities known for their public art, as I mentioned, New York, Chicago. Have any of you been to Millennium Park in Chicago? That's some $350 million that were invested, mostly private dollars that went into creating that incredible park there. But public art isn't an industry, and there's no if you build it, they will come formula that applies, although a lot of people have tried to copy Millennium Park and say, if only we had an urban sculpture park, we'll get all these people coming to our city. Well, it doesn't just work cookie cutter style. Public art is about people. It's about artists and communities, audiences, and creators of experiences in this experimental dialogue. It's about beauty and joy and delight. Public art is a collaborative engagement of people working toward common goals and common good. It's about co-creating a sense of pride in the places we call home. It's the visible evidence of our culture. So now, how do you put a price tag on that? How do we measure economic impact of culture or of the aesthetic ecology? How do we measure the value of civic engagement and community? Contemporary art, said Darcy Alexander, the chief curator at the Walker Art Center, has broken free of the studio and walked out onto the street where random occurrence, found objects, and a panoply of competing images can be sourced. I think that's pretty much sums it up. Contemporary art isn't just about what's happening in the studios and in the galleries and in the museums anymore. The nature of public art is changing, says law professor Stephen Miller in his report for Zoning and Planning Law Report. I know you all read this. But it's really interesting that he's addressing public art in a publication about zoning and planning law. He says it's increasingly interdisciplinary, digital, and ephemeral. And many cities around the country are seeking ways to revise this 50-year-old model known as percent for art, whereby a percentage of a development's overall construction costs, typically between 1/2 and 2%, are set aside to fund publicly accessible art. This funding method has not kept up with the times, and they are still largely used to fund on-site sculptures rather than off-site or temporary public art. Miller argues for the evolution of the percent for art fees programs, suggesting new definitions be written, broadening the realm of what can be supported. He also contests restricting ordinance to capital budgets, which are often limited to bricks and mortar types of projects. Public art trust funds are now being used to channel percent for art dollars. San Francisco recently revised their ordinance to allow for this. The types of public art funded should be broadened to include temporary or permanent projects, and they should be allowed on-site or off-site. Tampa, Florida, already allows for this kind of flexibility. Some cities are defining what public art is not and limiting the use of funds for projects such as billboards, billboard art, or mass-produced art or street furniture. Programs are reconsidering locations that are allowed, as well as the maintenance and conservation policies. And this is one of the biggest issues in the public art field. These millions of dollars that are being spent by these 300 public art programs around the country means there's a lot of public art that needs maintenance and conservation. And many of these cities don't have programs or budgets to take care of the art that they've spent these millions of dollars on. So what's wrong with this picture? The art starts to deteriorate, then it starts to look bad, then it becomes more a liability than an asset. And then people start to complain about the public art program. So we really need to think out ahead when we're commissioning works that are meant to last, that there's some maintenance plan, there's a maintenance fund built into it. Or it's not meant to last forever, and 10 years is okay too. Or 10 days may be okay. Embracing the new frontiers of public art requires embracing a new paradigm for how public art is funded, and also finding creative solutions to evaluating public art programs based on overall community benefit provided to the city over time. So I would invite you to consider vacant storefront installations, street performances, outdoor projections, flash mob events, artists in residence, community engagement strategies that instill civic pride and inspire dialogues among neighbors. If you can think of ways to get neighbors talking to each other that aren't talking to each other, and public art can do this, you can imagine then a conversation that's long overdue between people who have obviously some shared concerns, shared interests. So it sounds like a minimal kind of thing, or a very modest goal to get people to talk to each other, even though they're neighbors. But sometimes that's an obstacle for a lot of communities. Consider the goals of the city as a whole and how they intersect with the goals of the arts community, as well as industry and businesses and even environmental sustainability. And if you look at where all of those fields overlap, you can start to establish criteria for what kind of public art would best serve your community. So I want to leave you with a few, overviews, and I'm glad to provide this PowerPoint to John and to share with you if you want to have access to it. But these are some of the trends from cultural tourism. We know about plastic animals. I've seen a few plastic boots in Red Wing. Art parks, an urban park like Millennium Park. Educational initiatives, they're actually teaching courses in public art. There's a few degree programs that are appearing. These ordinances, as I mentioned, to revise them, to broaden their scope. Lots of art in transit. Arts with sports facilities, art in libraries. Temporary festivals. This Blanche Nuit, those are these all-night festivals. Any of you know about the Northern Spark Festival that happened in June? A few of you. I mean, it starts at dusk and it goes till dawn, and there's hundreds of arts activities, and believe it or not, thousands of people out all night exploring these art activities. And it's very exciting. And it puts a different spin on the kind of community that does that sort of thing. Placemaking is a big catchword these days. Not everybody knows what it means. We could have a whole hour discussion about that. Artists in residence, art centers, street art in the museums as well as outside. These smartphone art projects and mapping art and archiving projects. Just about every criteria now I see for calls for artists requires some kind of low maintenance or sustainability, and LED lighting is the new thing. If you're lighting public art, you're probably going to be thinking about LED. Or repurposing materials. You probably don't realize this, but the city of Red Wing and their public works department probably have a yard where they store all the stuff that they can't use anymore. They take it off the street, that street sign got damaged, it's sitting in a yard. There's a lot of good raw material, I bet, that's sitting at artists' disposal here in the city. And how many of you know about yarn bombing, or have seen yarn bombing? I drove through Cannon Falls on the way here. I noticed there's this little yarn place with people just knitting away inside it. And I'm waiting for the parking meter to be covered in a cozy right next door. That's yarn bombing. It's a very soft version of graffiti, you know? What about funding models? A lot of people want to know what are the different ways you can fund public art. Well, there's the percent for art model, but I've also heard of billboard taxes and license plate fees, hotel motel tax, gambling proceeds. Council Bluff, Iowa, believe it or not, puts millions of dollars into public art because of the Iowa West Foundation that takes money from the gambling casinos and channels it into public art and community improvements. Now you've got a great casino right in your neighborhood. Wouldn't it be great if some of the proceeds went to fund art projects in this community? Maybe they already do. Tax return checkbox, postage stamps, micro grants, and online giving, Kickstarter works, and re-granting programs like the one Forecast has, where we get money from foundations, we set up a deadline for artists to apply, a selection panel reviews, and we're giving grants out to artists. And of course, foundation grants for project support is happening all the time. But you can also consider auctions, percent from private development, pooling funds, a golf tax. There's $1 per bag in Portland, Oregon that goes into the arts fund. A graffiti abatement fund. City of Minneapolis has a lot of money going into public art coming out of graffiti abatement budgets. Why do they do that? It's because a good mural on a wall actually discourages graffiti. What a great concept. In fact, there's more money being spent on graffiti removal than there is on commissioning all the public art combined in this country. Corporate sponsorships, private gifts, trading art for other art. You know, we're kind of tired of our sculpture. We really like yours. Could we just trade? Bartering with artists. You know, artists are really good at bartering. There's a whole economy that's happening without money at all. And community foundations. There's one in Greensboro, North Carolina, where, you know, community foundation, it's through a philanthropic community foundation, but patrons, donors can say, we want a donor-advised fund. Well, in Greensboro, there were enough people that said, let's create a public art endowment at the community foundation. And the people who contribute into it get to help be on the selection committee that would select art for their community. They don't all agree on what they should spend the money on. But the planning process is a really challenging thing. But if you look at what the larger citywide goals are, and the plans, if there are plans and there are goals, you've got to start with that. Because if your public art program or your arts development program as a whole isn't dovetailing or reinforcing that, you're obviously not going to find the support or get the traction that you need. And dialogues with key stakeholders and champions in places of power, I can't say strongly enough how valuable that is. Public-private partnerships, and of course recruiting, engaging these leaders and these champions. We do a lot of location analysis, you know, looking at a site and asking the site, what does it want? What does it need? You know, and maybe not everybody's cut out to do this kind of work, but there is a sensitivity that you get. You know, walking in the woods on a path, walking down a sidewalk, looking at blank walls, and it maybe speaks to you. What does this place really want? What would improve this area? Coming up with those criteria is really important, because once you know what the criteria are and what does success look like, you can work everything from there going forward. Public art overlay maps. Well, that's where if you're looking at your whole city or your whole region, and you're looking at key areas like entry points into it, like right here off of Highway 61, to get to this place. That's where I would start right now, to just help people like me find a great art resource like this. And public art master plans. Well, in those, you need to think about governance and selection and policies and how to get things done. And you might look at, say, historic preservation methods that you already have. It means there's probably already a governance system in place, because a lot of people care about historic preservation. If you look at the structure, how that works hierarchically within a city or county, you can pretty much model along those lines. Management is another issue, you know, finding staff to run public art programs or even maintain a collection. It's a financial challenge for a lot of communities. And of course, strategic work plans and engaging the community and engaging the artists and the arts organizations. If you can figure that out, that's really golden too. So that's my talk, and thank you for indulging me. I'd love to follow up with, you know, any conversation, questions that you might have.
Jeff, I'm just going to ask people to kind of hold their questions.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll launch into the second presentation, and then Randy will kind of moderate the Q&A if you don't mind.
Okay.
Terrific. Thank you. Good job.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
I'm going to get started because I'm not sure if the technology will work. So I'm going to let them futz with that so we don't lose any more time. My name is Gülgün Kayım, excuse me, not my husband's name. And
we need to mic you.
yeah, it's on, but yeah, I've got it on, but it's not on. Thank you. Ah, there we go. And I'm the Director of Arts, Culture and Creative Economy for the City of Minneapolis. That creative economy piece we can't forget. I came to the city about a year ago in a new job that was called Director of Arts. But in the process of exploring what that job could be, I expanded it to arts and culture and then to creative economy. And I can talk more about that later during question and answer if you prefer. So when I arrived at the city, I actually worked through the city coordinator's office, which is equivalent to the CEO of the city. And the work of the city coordinator is really to work with the broader city enterprise. We work with every department in multiple ways. My job is within the city coordinator's office to be the art specialist. So I will go into a department at their request and help them build their arts goals towards a particular creative economy goal. Within the city itself, we have our own economic goals that do refer to arts and artists, and the one that I work under primarily is the idea that art and artists are economic drivers in and of themselves. So I go about with that principle in mind, and I also measure whether any of that is actually working. So when I arrived at the city, one of the first things I was asked to do was to provide some indicators for the creative economy. And I went to our community planning and economic development department, which has a research wing, and asked them to collaborate with me to find out what currently the city actually measures. And in that conversation, we discovered that the city does measure the arts through jobs, but the way that measurement happens is a very particular and narrow measurement. Okay, so as I explained, we started to work on indicators for jobs in the economy. And what we discovered through that work was that the indicators that the city has are very specific. Essentially, what the city does is it measures the arts through businesses and employers. In this case, it will measure the Guthrie Theatre and everyone employed in the Guthrie Theatre, regardless of whether that person is an accountant or an actor. So it goes through the DEED data, and that's how DEED measures employment. So it tracks the actual employers. When I looked at that with CPED, I actually was a little bit concerned because I know, and I should also add, I have been working in the public art field and through the Bush Foundation as the Assistant Director for Arts and Culture for a long time. And I'm also an artist, a fellow of the Bush Foundation myself. So having worked in the industry both as an administrator and as an artist, I had a different view of the arts economy and ecology that was more complex. My view and knowledge was that many artists actually tool together their lives through different employment streams. They will work part-time for one organization or another organization and make their own work and sell it. So the idea that we were measuring arts through a single employment was of concern to me because I felt that Minneapolis is a very big center for arts, and we were not able to show truly how many artists were in our community and where those jobs were and how to measure them and how to measure that impact. So with that in mind, I began to have a conversation with that department. And through that conversation, I realized that many people within that department saw the arts differently than I did. And this is where I move over and I show you my diagram about what it forced me to do was to draw out, to diagram how I see the arts. And essentially, do people know, are people familiar with biology here, ecologies, how an ecology looks? I diagrammed an ecology, essentially with arts at the center. So in this case, not arts as just general arts. I put in skilled producers. I put in my worm here, right, was the artist, and those people who are skilled producers, and they're making art. What they're doing is they're creating the widget we call art, and the kinds of people that are doing this are individual artists who are making the art, are arts organizations who are making the art, large and small. Essentially, they're spending most of their time, or all their time, just making that art. And that's at the center of my ecology. On the outside circle is the support for that. So what I mean by that are art service organizations. So in the Twin Cities, we're really lucky to have an embarrassment of riches in these organizations. Springboard for the Arts, the Northern Clay Center, Textile Center, Forecast Public Artworks. Many of these organizations focus on one particular element of the sector. So what they're doing there is they're building the audience for that sector. For example, the St. Croix Clay Tour that the Northern Clay Center really actively creates, it produces the technical support for the artists. So it will re-grant, if there are grants coming through, it will re-grant, it will provide technical assistance, it will provide a window into that particular discipline for an ordinary public. So essentially what those organizations do are support the artists, essentially. Around the next circle are my arts educators. And what I'm trying to say here is that through arts education, what happens is that we are training future arts producers, the future skilled workers, and the consumers of art. Essentially what we're saying is if you remove education from the equation, you lose your future art producers and your future art audiences. So your ecology breaks down. We go on. We talk about public infrastructure. We talk about the role of the public realm, and by that I also include philanthropy. The public realm provides the infrastructure and framework for the basics to exist. In this sense, we can include public art in that because the City of Minneapolis has its own public art program, and it works very closely with Public Works to do all kinds of public events. In one case we do work with Nuit Blanche, which is the Northern Lights Festival. We also produce artwork, sculptures to beautify our environment. We also do infrastructural things of all kinds that deal with art. So we have our own Percent for Art program. But there's also Minnesota Citizens for the Arts, which creates the lobby. We have the Minneapolis Arts Commission, which helps advocate within the city for artists. We also have the State Arts Board, etc., etc. So those functions are really infrastructural, creating the environment where artists can actually thrive. Outside of that, we have what we call amateur artists, or people who don't spend a great majority of their time within the art field, but are still active participants. In this case, people who go home and really are passionate about art and still get involved in the buying and selling of art, but it's not their core activity of earning income. These people work in civic choirs, they donate at great numbers, they volunteer, they are the cheerleaders a great deal for people, more skilled producers who are spending almost 100% of their time making the work. And sometimes they transition into being skilled producers themselves because they are so dedicated to the work that they do. At some point in their career, they become those skilled producers. And then on the very outside of our circle, we have tourism. So fans, tourism, collectors, people who are indirect participants in the art. And what I'm doing when I'm explaining this to you is I'm trying to explain the complexity of the field, and I haven't even talked about creative industries, which is a term that we use in the city, and within my ecology, it's a circle that kind of overlaps like a Venn diagram. Creative industries are industries who have a goal that they're doing, so like building a house or making a hamburger, but art adds value to that goal. So for example, if I'm making a hamburger and it's a McDonald's burger, it can be extraordinarily cheap. But if I make a designer burger, then I can charge more for that because there's been more energy and more time and more thought gone into the production of that thing. So what art does in that instance is add value to the product. So think about architecture, think about product design, think about furniture design and fashion. The name of the artist accelerates the price. So within creative industries, we have graphic design, advertising, product design, furniture design, food of all kinds, from extraordinary fancy food to food trucks, especially in the Twin Cities. We also have another sector which is focused on cross-sector participation in the arts. By that I mean the arts and equation. Arts and health, arts and aging, arts and community development. All of these guys share the same goal as the and that they join. So the goal for the arts and therapy is to heal. And therefore they use arts to basically produce that goal. The goal of arts and community development is to develop that community. So that's another circle of activity which also produces value. And the final one are arts festivals. Arts festivals were one that we really struggled with knowing where to place because we see it as a first encounter for many people who don't have arts in their daily experiences or are not direct or indirect participants in the arts, festivals tend to be one way in which they do encounter. So we do see it as important, but not absolutely essential to the infrastructure. There are pieces that are very essential, and there are pieces that you can take and move around as interchangeable. Regardless, it's all about the ecology, and what I say is that the worm in the center can be food, or it can create your soil. And that worm is your art. And the kinds of participation that requires that to happen are both buying and selling participation on the level of commerce, but also participation on the level of social participation. So I see those as equal. And the reason I'm explaining this to you is because at the city, the diagram that we developed was developed through conversation. It's actually one that I'm still testing with communities. I've been testing with researchers, and I'm testing in a measurement that we're actually now embarking on within the city called the Creative Vitality Index. The Creative Vitality Index is an index that the city purchased in December, and we are actually all at the end of that process now, and we will be producing it and rolling it out in October. It's an index. Do people know what an index is? Yes, no, maybe? It's actually, okay, like any other economic index, it's sort of like, it's an aggregation of data that gets boiled down to one number. And in our index, the number is 1. And the Creative Vitality Index is actually a syndicated measure that we purchase from Westaff, which is the Western States Arts Federation. And if anyone is familiar with Arts Midwest, yeah? Westaff is the Western States version of Arts Midwest. And Westaff has a research wing. So after our conversation in CPED about, guys, the realm is much more complicated. And I will send Jack the realm so you guys can take a look at it. It's much more complicated than we are actually measuring at the city. We're measuring a fragment of this, and it's really important to me, my job, and my colleagues, that it be seen in its whole and its complexity. So we need to get the realm bigger. We need to start to think about measurement on a more sophisticated level. So I went about looking for those measures, and I came up with 3. There's an Americans for the Arts economic measure. There's a cultural data project that's produced by Pew Charitable Trusts, and there's Westaff's CVI, the Creative Vitality Index. We ended up with the CVI for some main reasons. First of all, it's quick. I started in August, and I needed to produce something very quickly to start to measure the industry and to help the City Council understand the scope. So I needed something I could produce quickly. I needed something I could produce annually. And that was really important because most of the great measures that are out there are one-off reports. And it doesn't mean anything to me. I need to see growth over a long period of time. So I needed to be able to track stuff before and after. So before 2012 and after 2012. And I needed reliable data. So I needed to know that I could get census-like data, and I needed to know that I could get deed data, and I needed to be able to aggregate them all together. And that was what Westaff was going to provide me. And also, very importantly, an index is useful in communication, as a communication tool. People can get their heads around a number 1. So are we above 1 or below 1 is really the question we're asking ourselves. And so that public engagement piece was important to the city. It also creates a baseline of data for us, hard data, to be able to say, what is it that we've got here? And also, it provides for me, especially within my job, some kind of conversation about what we should measure. So we know the CVI that we're going into with Westaff is not perfect. It only measures the selling, the buying and selling, the commerce. That's what participation means for the CVI. It also measures jobs, so I'm really happy about that. But it follows the occupation of each artist. It doesn't do it through industry, which I'm very happy about. So that means if you're a contractor and you work for 2 different organizations, that it will follow you, not the organization. And then it also measures the but the revenues of nonprofit arts organizations and cultural organizations. So we can measure the History Center's work. So that is much more sophisticated than we've had before, and it's had an offset in that within the city we can now have a more sophisticated conversation about what measurement looks like, and it's beginning to change a department's view. We're actually in active conversation now with CPED Research saying that really, do we really want what we've got, or shall we go with this? Because with the CBI, I can show that we have 20,000 artists in the city. That means that's 5% of the total jobs within our city are arts jobs. We are spending $415 million in 1 year just in spending in commerce. That means that our CBI is 4 times greater than the national average. We're 6th in the nation in arts vitality. And that means we have an incredible market for arts for our population. It's a per capita measure. So for our population, we're spending over $1,000 a piece on art, which is a tremendous message to send into the community about how the potential we have and the potential for growth that we have. We're also mapping everything we're doing with our CBI, and that we're doing on our own. So the West staff doesn't provide that. We're mapping in the sense that we're showing where all the arts jobs are in the city. So regarding urban development, we can say there's a density here, not so much density here. If we want to relocate businesses, now we have something to go on. Are we going to relocate creative industries in this area or this area? Are we going to go for the deficit? Are we going to build up here? How about for artist housing? How about for, et cetera, you can imagine. So it's already, we're already having those conversations, and we've yet to roll it out to the city council, and we've yet to do a public rollout of it. So I'm not going to go on any longer. I think my time's over. And I'll take questions later. Sorry, I don't have the visuals. I spent so long on, but I will provide
them. So I don't have a microphone, so I'll do a little shout out here to you. Again, I'm Randy Olson with the Red Wing Port Authority, and had an opportunity to meet with John Becker on 2 occasions, and have come to appreciate his commitment to the community and to the arts community in particular. And so when he invited me to participate in this activity, this program this evening, I'm here because of intrigue, but also very, very impressed with the work that has been done so far with this committee, and really the far-reaching thinking that has been going on so far to really envision Red Wing as I would say, a premier arts community. And so John had shared with me the report this afternoon, and what impressed me most was the number of communities that this committee has visited, both in Minnesota and in Iowa, and to begin the process of really doing some benchmarking and acquiring of best practices. And so with this, I actually have some prepared questions, but maybe it would be important, first of all, if you have some questions for our speakers, and we can just have a spontaneous dialogue of what's on your mind, and what information they can share with us beyond their presentation. So does anybody have a question or questions for our guests? We can start from there. Yes, go ahead. And could you stand, please, and and your name?
Okay, my name's Kim Lampy, and I was curious how the effects of business and consumerism coming to more balance to a more niche market versus a mass appeal market, because in my experience I see a shift where people have more access online to find art and information, and so they're less influenced by mass appeal, and how that affects public art and what you guys do.
A very interesting question. I'm not sure I can answer it. I think that, especially with what I call the DIY movement in public art, the do-it-yourself, many more people, artists and non-artists, like yarn bombers and flash mobbers, and people putting up Christmas decorations, and people planning their own Halloween displays. It's about taking matters into your own hands and customizing what kind of art experiences you want, or creating the art experiences that you want, and not waiting for them to be delivered to you. And I think that a lot more people, especially young people and people who've been sort of fed up with the online, community, want to have real gathering places and real places to connect in person, in their physical spaces, in their communities. Have you heard the term third place? You have your home, that's your first place. Work, second. Where's the third place? The place you like to gather, the place you like to hang out. What are those places in your community? And then what kind of things do you do to make those places special? What are ways artists and others can contribute to making those places unique, attractive, magnets for activities, programmable and changing, not static and fixed, like I've been there, why should I go back? And I think a lot of people are feeling more and more empowered to make those changes for themselves, not wait for the city to do it, not wait for a grant to do it. And I find that sort of entrepreneurial spirit happening a lot more now. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it was very good information.
Other questions? Yes.
David Color, I'm an artist, Graham, and I'd like to ask you both, what's the most important thing that the city of Red Wing can do to foster a creative community, and what's the most important thing we as a creative community can do to foster?
I'm going to be biased and say stand up and be counted. From where I stand, one of the problems with what I'm doing is that this issue I mentioned earlier, that artists who put together their career through lots of different income streams, it's very difficult to track them or measure them, and I'd say almost impossible. Many people say that it's impossible to measure the arts, and that's one of the reasons. The other, of course, is the social value of the arts, which is very personal and value-based. So one message, actually, I just came from a meeting with Arts Commission members, was maybe one of the messages we want to say with our measure is stand up and be counted. When the census comes, put your occupation as artist, because otherwise you can't be measured, you can't be counted, and if you can't be counted, you're invisible, where I stand.
Yeah, I go along with that, but I'd say be counted in a more visible way. I think artists need to be at the table, and they need to be invited to the table, and they need to invite themselves to the table, okay? So that's both sides reaching out to the middle and saying, you know what, we need that creative input in decision-making at different levels. We know that artists think differently, they think outside the box, they think holistically, they're not as linear as a lot of people who might be city planners, and there are ideas that can come out of that conversation when artists are at the table that are sometimes the most obvious solutions that people go, yeah, why didn't we think of that? And it's partly because they're not trained to, follow these, prescribed ways to get from point A to point B. They're much more intuitive, exploratory. Why not this? But, yeah, actually that's an interesting idea. The inviting the artist to the table, though, takes some leadership, sometimes some risk-taking, they're unpredictable. But I think good can come out of that. And then it's about having a shared vision and having a shared definition of what does success look like for our community. If we're not on the same page about that, you're really not going to get a lot of traction with either arts development, community development, or economic development.
I was wondering if you could maybe talk about the benefits of an arts commission.
The benefits of an art
Arts Commission?
Commission.
Okay. We're currently, that's a great question because we're currently in strategic planning for the Arts Commission, the Minneapolis Arts Commission, which has been around since the 1970s. 72, I believe, was the first year it was established. The benefits of an Arts Commission is you have a group of, so I'll tell you about our Arts Commission first. It's composed of people who are arts supporters, so who are not practicing artists, but are supporters in various ways, so citizens who do that, and also practicing artists of all levels, from emerging to experience, from working with large organizations to mid and small to individuals. And they have interests from across disciplines. So it's a diverse group of people, racially and practice-wise as well as discipline-wise. The benefit of an Arts Commission in a city environment is that it helps the City Council get a view on arts that is coming from a group that is focused on the issue of arts. Often in government, it's very hard when we have debates around aesthetics as to what is, people get involved in subjective descriptions of aesthetics and not realize it and think that they're actually talking about it objectively. And an Arts Commission actually helps us define what that territory is better. Our Arts Commission works directly with our public art coordinator, and especially on the public art commissioning process. It also helps in supporting me in my work and helping develop an infrastructure for artists. So one of the things that it helps do is do public work around, we actually just talked about doing a resource fair. So in terms of what artists need in the community to make them successful, one of those things could be just in the technical resource fair, helping artists understand where to get grants, healthcare, the basics in life, to help support them so they can be more successful. So an Arts Commission is really, it can be very useful. We did a survey and a study of Arts Commissions when we're doing this strategic planning across the nation, asking key cities we like to compete with, like Seattle and Portland and Austin and all those other places. And we found out that the Arts Commissions in their cities are radically different. They each have completely different identities, activities, roles, power, and so therefore there's place specific. And ours is very place specific. It's part of the lateral structure of our government. In Minneapolis we have a weak mayoral system, and so it evens out some of that. In other cities it will be different, So I would say decide, look at the national trends and decide what your community needs and make it what you need it to be.
I would like to add that there are cities that do just fine without an arts commission. And there are cities with arts commissions that are really wishing they didn't have one. The city of St. Paul, for example, doesn't have an arts commission, doesn't have an arts department. It has an arts development manager, works out of the mayor's office. And it's a strong mayor-weak council, so it's really interesting contrast to the city of Minneapolis. And if you're working out of the mayor's office, you can get things done. And one of the advantages of having one staff person who's the arts development person is they have some freedom to get some things done and move faster than if it has to go through lengthy process and review and debate, and it gets very political very quickly. Managing a good arts commission is another art form all on its own.
You're going to leave it at that, right? Other questions?
Oh, I should add one other thing, is an arts commission can say things I cannot, because I work for the city enterprise and I serve the business plan of the city coordinator's office. So there are certain things I cannot tell the city council, whereas a citizen body can.
Robert Meyer, artist and arts administrator. Has enough time gone by with the legacy monies to determine its effectiveness in the arts scene in Minnesota? And if, what has been the effect of the legacy money to date?
I can answer that from our CVI. So we have seen an uptick in revenue, organizational revenue, We actually are 13 times greater than the national average for organizational revenue. And so we did our CBI for the last 3 years, but in the process of working with Westar, we actually got 10 years worth of data. And we saw a dip in revenue before the legacy because of the impact of the down economy. And then with the legacy injection of money, that went up. So we could say we're actually a national leader in organizational support. And that's had a direct impact in the numbers.
Yeah, the timing of the legacy amendment was really amazing because as programs were closing and threatened all around the country, all of a sudden Minnesota had this new constitutional amendment. We're the only state with the word art in our constitution. That's pretty impressive. But you know, it's a constant challenge to keep the legacy money flowing to the arts. It comes up every 2 years to the legislature, and the Citizens for the Arts are working all the time to make sure that other lobbying groups don't say, now it's art, and we're going to take that money. So it's not a done deal, and it's not something to take for granted.
I should add one other thing, which is, I'm sorry to be a numbers person, because when we see the upticks in organizational revenue, we're not seeing the same in jobs. So just like any sector, the art sector dipped with jobs, and it is in recovery mode, but it's not recovering at the same pace as the rest of the economy. So while we're still very healthy, we're not at the levels pre-recession. And that tells me that even though the legacy amendment money has helped, it hasn't helped in full-time jobs.
I would add too, in the public art field, it's a very slow-moving process. Now, a lot of the projects you're seeing now, the big public art projects, were funded 4 or 5 years ago and are finally getting done and coming to fruition. And what that means is we're reaching the end of a good economy in the public art field, and a lot of it's starting to drop off. A lot of programs around the country are either cutting or have cut, or their program's cut, or their staff is cut, or both. Wisconsin, they completely eliminated the arts program. I mean, it's really, really sad.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
My name is Fred Harding. Jack, do you see a benefit in bringing art into non-traditional spaces, for example, empty storefronts in downtown areas? That's a ringer.
That's too easy, Fred.
Sorry.
Yes, I do see advantages of having artists take over vacant storefronts. There's many good reasons why it's better to have an art installation in a vacant storefront than a for rent sign, or even worse, a boarded up storefront with no for rent sign. The perception is there's something happening here. It actually draws more attention to the space than a for rent sign would, and you're much more likely to find a tenant for that space sooner through the art being a marketing device than if you just left it sitting there like nobody cares about it. So there are a lot of programs around the country, and there's right now a big initiative in the Whittier neighborhood in South Minneapolis called Artist Storefronts. They've taken over, you know, a dozen or so empty storefronts that are around, and people are eager to have artists come in, not necessarily to have spaces that people can go inside, because that's a whole liability issue and safety issue. But if you think about storefront displays to face out onto the street, the lights come on at night or whatever it is, it totally transforms an otherwise sad neighborhood or block into something that looks like there's something going on here. So it's a win-win deal, and I highly recommend if you have a space sitting empty, donate it to the artists so they can afford to do something creative in there rather than charge them money, and then they're crippled to do the kind of art projects that they would like to do. And you can have a deal with them that if we rent the space out, I'm giving you 2 weeks notice, you have to be out. Most artists will accept that offer if the space is free.
I'd like to add to that conversation. We are working with the idea of pop-up storefronts for a project that we received funding for with a partnership grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. It's called Our Town, and the Hennepin Theatre Trust, Art Space, and Walker Art Center partnered with the City of Minneapolis to develop the Hennepin Avenue corridor as a creative and arts corridor. And part of the problem on Hennepin Avenue is really occupation, pedestrian traffic, and empty businesses. So we're looking at filling those storefronts with arts activity on a temporary level in order to test out ideas. So what can work here? Can we see the testing of this idea before we commit to renovating the space or invest some dollars in it? So that's what we're looking at. Having said that, it's not so easy, because behind that temporariness, there's all kinds of permits, zoning, and codes that we have to develop in the city to accommodate that work. Just as some background, my art practice is in site-specific performance, and I've worked in the public realm in temporary places for years. And there's a lot of detail that goes into zoning. Whether you can actually achieve what you want to do, whether you can have permits, temporary use permits, or deal with fire code if you're having an audience in a space, whether you're going to be displaying, so I just don't want to go on and say it shouldn't happen, but what needs to happen is a cooperative attitude, and the city needs to work with you. So there's a wonderful project right now called the Starling Project, which has developed in order to be the middleman between the artists who don't often work with these systems, because it's a lot, and the business owner who may not care about the art, but may care about marketing their space, or having some temporary income from an empty space. So it's a mixed bag, and I think it should be investigated and dealt with, and that's something that we're kind of actively engaged in at the city level.
And I would have vacant lots too.
Yeah,
Yes.
parking lots
Storefronts are
especially.
fun, but vacant lots, parking lots, plenty of opportunity there.
Goldman, you used a phrase once I heard. You said a strategy of deploying lots of little.
Oh yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so this actually refers to my bigger job description. So, but essentially I'm there to develop Minneapolis's creative economy, and so in that case I break it down into building social capital and economic capital. So that's essentially what I do. And regarding the strategy, when I came to the city, I actually saw that there was plenty of support and assistance for the larger organizations. And we have an organization called Meet Minneapolis, which provides a lot of that. And yet, we were not really seeing and addressing the many mid-sized and small organizations that we have so much of in the Twin Cities. So the strategy is really to support many little projects and organizations in order to get density. And that's actually, there's a theory behind it that isn't mine, obviously. It's the work of Charles Landry, who talks about the resilience of an economic strategy where you're bringing together lots of little efforts, such as storefronts, and various efforts where you're building a matrix of them. So if one storefront doesn't do well, you haven't lost your entire workforce. So instead of investing in bringing in large employers, you're bringing in lots of little employers, and you're spreading your risk through that. And that's what I mean by lots of little. So when you're looking at urban development, how can you develop your urban spaces so that you bring in food trucks, or you bring in small businesses, or it's that small business mentality, and then that density is what pays off.
Smart.
What experience have you had with getting the business sector of a community more involved in
Well, there's so many different ways that you can look at what a business is about and where it might overlap with what artists or arts organizations are about. So if it's a printing company, there's plenty of opportunities for artists who might need help with printing. Or if it's a business that has vacant storefront or window space that they're not even using, you could see how it could be a space opportunity for artists. Often comes down to what are the business's goals or challenges or what have you, and then trying to line them up with answers or creative solutions that artists might come up with. And oftentimes businesses don't think about the artist community as being in any way helping them with solving their problems or furthering their goals, but there's lots of ways that could be done. So if you want to give me an example of a business, I could probably throw out some ideas to give an example for you. What's your business?
I'm an artist.
I should have mentioned the Irrigate project in St. Paul, which is actually a strategy that works directly with businesses. It's a project that was funded by an organization called Art Place, and working with Springboard for the Arts, the Mayor's Office in St. Paul, and LISC, which is I can't remember what the acronym is for, but it supports and develops arts. Essentially what it does, Irrigate does, is along the central corridor, which is currently being developed, the light rail, the destruction that's happening along that corridor to redevelop it is really impacting the business located right on the corridor. So they have to be closed for a long period of time, and for some of those small businesses that could mean that's the end, they lose their foot traffic. So Irrigate's objective is to provide relationships with artists that go into those businesses, develop a project, and through that project bring foot traffic to the business. And some of them are straight on beautification projects, so there may be murals. Others are events. Others, really depends on what the need of the business is and what the artist can bring to the business. So that's a really active project that's being funded on the national level. It's an outside funder, so it's no lose for the business. But for some businesses, it's really meant the difference between survival and dying. And I think that's actually very important in an urban level, because many of those businesses are owned by new immigrant communities. And there was added to that problem of this urban development, the conversation and friction around the fact that these new immigrant communities were going to go out of business, and the property developers were going to snap up that real estate because they could wait out the construction period and therefore build these fences. The gentrification of the corridor was being debated, and there was a lot of agitation around that. And I think this helped preserve some of the identity that was already there, and actually that identity is now being built on. So they're talking about branding certain parts of the central corridor as these unique new immigrant communities that really are an asset to that development.
But at its core, what it was doing could happen anywhere.
Absolutely.
It's about encouraging the artist to go out and find somebody they want to go talk to and say, this is what I do. Is there some way we might work together? Okay. So it's what I was saying before in answer to David's question. Artists putting themselves out there and at the table and meeting with people and having those conversations, because it's just through that dialogue that you might spark up the right conversation that leads to a project for you.
I have something to say on Carolyn Hedin. About the business, I have some ideas that I think we're overlooking. The possibility for so many businesses to collect art, to display art, so that it's through education and then creating an appreciation for art for all the employees that are in the building. And it wouldn't have to be limited to businesses. I think our city should do the same in our government buildings, and it could be everywhere.
Yeah.
Very good. I'm helping Ramsey County. They just remodeled their offices for their human resources, and they have all these blank walls. The problem is the county, when they give them the money to rehab those spaces and even furnish it, they don't allow for art. And I said, well, if you save any money out of your furnishing budget, just say it's furnishings. So there are ways to get around what might be a barrier, because art isn't a line item in the budgets often.
I would also encourage the idea of this art or creativity adding value to a product. there's it was actually, this is not a story that I own, it was on NPR about a project whereby they were demonstrating this idea. A group decided to go out and buy some stuff from a garage sale for very little, then asked writers to write a fictional short story for that object, post it on Craigslist and ask for the people to start bidding on it. And some of these, not all of them, but some of these objects went for hundreds of dollars because of the name of the writer who was writing the story for that object. And people wanted to own the story and the object. And that's a really interesting way to see, how can businesses collaborate with artists so that artists can add value to whatever it is that they're working on. So that art isn't so much a separate activity, but part of integrated into daily life. And for me, it's always about how to get the artist to reap in the wealth themselves, how to earn a living, so that it's not such something that I've got to buy it with my regular goods, not with this sort of thing over here.
I mentioned barter before too. Do you have a Goodwill store here? Yes? Well, there's a St. Paul that has a Goodwill resource center and store. And I try to convince them that there's this found object artist, Al Wadzinski. It'd be great. Why don't you have an artist in residence? Give him a space. He can have his choice of all the stuff that's coming through Goodwill and turn it into art for your walls, and all you need to do is give him a free studio space. Well, they didn't go for that, but I thought it was a great idea.
Yeah.
Robert?
I think in the last 20 years or so, the arts have been, I would say, the 5th largest growth industry in this area. Not only in Red Wing, but also in the upper Mississippi, including the little river towns of Stockholm, Maiden Rock, and Pepin, etc. And I'm wondering what suggestions you would have to try to persuade our city officials or county officials to realize that the arts play an extremely important role beyond tourism. And by that I mean, how would you suggest city council members, county commissioner members, et cetera, begin to realize that the arts have a place in the community and in the development of the spirit of the place?
I can maybe start on that. So that's actually a major part of what I have to do. And we just received, the City of Minneapolis just received 3 grants from Art Place for creative placemaking projects. And they all are, in one level or another, partnering with the city to do that, to achieve those projects. So we have about $1.3 million in grant funding, not coming to the city, but through city partnerships. And all of those projects are infrastructure projects. So at some level or other, they're about improving our communities and the vitality of our communities. One of them is the project in Franklin Avenue, and it's creating some identity for that place. So that's very concrete. It's about changing the way the area looks and feels to attract people off of the light rail to go and want to engage in it. Another project is actually connecting with city planning. So what we're doing in that project is to put artists at the table when it comes to working with planners. And I have to argue with Jack here because planners are as creative as artists. We have found through this work. They are as divergent in their thinking. It's just that the product is dealt with differently. So for planners, they have to give away their product and let the city council futz with it, whereas artists don't. And that's actually a very interesting thing to discover through this work. But essentially what that is planners working with artists to develop the planning process so that it can be a more engaged process with the community, and then walking away and letting those plans exist within the city comp plan. So we will have a 10-year comp plan later down the road that we will be able to refer to these plans. And those plans are the ones that the City of Minneapolis will be basing its infrastructure on. So that is a very direct example of artists adding value to an existing, and that's how I see it. I see it as how can artists add value to something that's already existing so that it can be a more successful project, a more successful product, so that we can see arts not as an add-on, but as an essential part of our everyday life. Because I think for so long we have made efforts to separate it as a discrete activity when we know that it actually isn't a discrete activity. We know it's already part of our everyday lives, but through the disciplines we have sort of pushed it away. And that's what I do a lot, is reintegrate. That's why I work laterally with departments. I don't have a budget and I don't have a staff. I work with everybody else's budget and everybody else's staff to achieve arts products and goals. And actually another city is doing this, Philadelphia. And I'm learning from my colleagues in Philadelphia about how successful they've been. The NEA is also doing this through their work, working laterally with departments. So it's actually a stance that many others in other urban environments have begun to take. And what that allowed us to do is go from a mentality of scarcity to asking for money constantly to a mentality of abundance. Now I'm drinking from several fire hoses because there are many departments that see a place for what I have to offer, because we're under stress like every other public entity is, because local government aid is getting cut all the time, staff is getting cut all the time. So if there's a way in which they can still achieve their goals and have someone come in who can help them tweak what they are and add a different spin to it and still get in maybe an even better product, that's what I help people do. So
I have a simple formula that I believe very strongly in, and it's that first you need awareness, like the slideshow I did tonight, before you can get to understanding, and then you need to get to appreciation before you get to support. So awareness is an educational moment. How can we expose the people who are civic leaders, decision makers at the government level, to what are all the options? What are other people doing? What are other cities doing? A lot of it is just lack of awareness of all these options. And then building some understanding. Why are all these cities doing it? How is that working? And then realizing there's outcomes that are really beneficial, which leads to an appreciation of all of these things and all of these options. And you've got to go through those steps before you're going to get to that support. Now, I get it, and I want to do something about it. And so I really believe that education is a big part of it. And this is one of the reasons I get invited to go meet with city councils and do a slideshow, or take them on a tour, have them talk to artists. It's that if we had only known, we would have done this differently.
Yes.
I'm Cynthia, and I'm going to stand and yell because I know I have a soft voice. You were just talking about education, and I wanted to expand on that maybe from a different perspective. How much time do you think is necessary to put into the perception of the artist and how that maybe needs to change during this whole process? Because to get to the table, first that door needs to be open and the invitation there. As an artist now, after retiring from 25 years in the nonprofit field with a business degree, 5 years human rights lobbyist, there's much more to me than painting on a canvas. And I think people's perception is that I'm so limited in art only. They're not looking at me as a problem solver. That's all I do is solve problems as I'm working, or having the background that I do, or having the relationships that I do. How much do you think, how much time do you think needs to be spent on that as well?
It's a great question. I don't know how you do it.
Could you repeat it? Just
summarize it. How do we get to the point where, how long does it take to educate people, or how long before, say, somebody's enlightened to the point where they would open the door and engage in that conversation and awareness at the city council level, or the decision maker levels, or the funders level? And the answer is it varies quite a bit. But I find that the more exposure or dialogues they've had directly with artists to realize who artists are and what they can do, the more likely they are to say, I already know some things we should be doing, and the door starts to open. So for example, the city of St. Louis Park, one of the city council members went to Europe, and he saw art everywhere, around every place he went. And he came back to St. Louis Park and goes, now how come we're not doing that here? Well, they can do it, we can do it. It was that kind of initiative, and I ended up getting this phone call. I understand you can help us do that. So I'm lucky that the word is out that I can help somebody do that, and a facilitator or an educator or somebody to point people in the right direction can be a big help. As Gilligan pointed out, even with these vacant storefronts, it's not as simple as just walking in and setting up your work and having that exposure. But if you have a connection to the people that you're thinking are there in influence, how do you get an introduction? How do you get a lunch meeting? How do you get to meet with them as a person to person rather than I'm coming with a complaint or I have an idea what the city should do? That's not the good starting point. It's about letting them understand who you are, not just a product maker, but a problem solver, a creative person that might actually be a resource beyond something to sell in a marketplace, which I firmly believe many artists and many people here who don't think of themselves as artists, you are. And you are creative problem solvers in your own right. You have to make choices every day, and many of them are pretty creative ones. If we had a one-on-one, I'm sure I could tell you all the creative choices you made today just to even get here tonight. And the fact is, we don't stop to think about it that much. We take everything for granted. This is just the way it is. But if you stop and really think about it, there's a lot more there that just needs to have the light shed on it and the conversation around it. How do you get the conversation is really the question.
In where I live, so to speak, in my work, there are actually council members who are artists themselves. There are a number of council members actually. And so regardless of their own experience, it's still very difficult to have leverage because in the thought to support the arts or artists, because in the public realm, the debate is over how the decision gets made around the spending of the money. So it's a tricky conversation to have, regardless of the fact that they know through their own experience the value of the work that they do. We're hoping that the measurement practices that we're entering into helps our community have better conversations about the value that this industry brings to the broader community. That's why in our measure, we measure the jobs against the greater number of jobs and art spending against greater number of art spending. So it's our effort to actually say we're a significant sector of the economy, regardless of personal or lack of personal experience. And so we take out the personality piece. We try to avoid that because it can get very tricky. And again, in the public realm, that's very contentious. It's very hard to have a value-based conversation because it's all very subjective.
Is there one last question? Yes, sir.
What were your questions going to be? Just throw them out.
Okay, well, these are not my questions. These are the questions that are posed in this paper that if you sign up in the back, you'll get a copy of it after September 1st. So the questions really had to do with these studies that were done. So for example, in Cook County on the North Shore, how can Red Wing's geography contribute to a creative economy? And maybe I'll just go through these here. If there's something that we haven't really discussed, in Minneapolis, could Red Wing identify specific expertise for economic development? I think we've touched on some of that already. John shared with me that there's a county in Iowa that developed this barn quilt campaign to put quilts made of wood on barns and made that their sort of brand in Iowa. So the question is, how can Red Wing initiate and sustain a creative legacy? That's a big question. In Dubuque, Iowa, what big creative projects make sense for Red Wing? And again, we probably should have you back, to continue the dialogue.
One thing that those kinds of questions tell me is developing economic strategy is really place specific. And a lot of the small area plans that we do within the city are about mapping the assets that we already have. And essentially, The CBI we're doing is really mapping an asset, which is, job spending, what we already have in the community. So I think again, for me, your capacity to make a strategy has to be based on some sort of measure that the broad spectrum of policymakers and citizens can accept, because it's about public spending to some degree, as well as private investment. But whatever strategies you develop need to be developed for you, about you, from your community, but you need to have some basis to start your conversation, which is why I think it's smart to begin with an actual measurement of what you have and an assessment of what you have. On another level, I have to say that the process that we underwent, which I thought was going to be relatively simple and quick at the City of Minneapolis, was not simple and quick. I got forewarning from Philadelphia about how hard it was going to be, so I ended up connecting with a researcher from MIT who came down for the summer, and we've been working flat out all summer. And I've really needed her because I'm not the researcher. I can't speak researchese, which they do to each other. I can't talk in data bytes and numbers as they do. So whatever you do, you need to have an expert working with all I do is I represent the industry. And I ask the questions. Can you measure this? What does this mean when you do that? What if you added these two? I ask the questions. She goes about looking for the answers. And I've also discovered that research and data aggregation is messy. It's an art, it's not a science, even though it sounds like it is. So it's really been important to have the expertise and to also know what your questions are, what you want to measure. Again, in the city, we started out saying, do we measure what we can, or do we measure what we want to measure? Because those are two different questions. And we're at the place now where we're saying we want to measure what we want to measure. We're measuring what we can right now, but what we want to measure is what we want to aspire to. So we have to develop different models for measurement, and that's actually gotten us into conversations with the NEA and their research wing. So we're trying, it's actually really interesting. Now we're looking at measuring relationships and mapping those relationships, because it's going to impact how arts activities can impact crime. Because our council members are interested in, if this arts activity happens, can you tell me that a few years down the road we'll have a better, crime statistics? And I have to figure out how to measure that.
I have two more questions for you, but they're really related, and I don't think we've talked about them. And this really stems from work that was done in Pella, Iowa, and also Fairfield, Iowa, and it has to do with entrepreneurship, artists and entrepreneurs. And how do we encourage the next generation of artist entrepreneurs? And then to foster that, how do we as a community increase tolerance for risk?
Well, Forecast has had a grant program for artists since 1989. And it's not a commissioning program. We're not asking artists to do something specific or telling them we want them to paint this wall. We're asking artists to imagine using their creativity in a public setting, anywhere in the state, or anywhere in your community. And asking artists, what would you do? Who would you like to reach? How would you like to use your creativity in a way that addresses a space, serves an audience, addresses an issue in the world? Here's some money, here's some technical assistance, go do that. And then document it and promote it, and even see what kind of difference did that make. Did it help the artist learn something? We encourage risk-taking. We encourage artists to be experimental. We encourage temporary projects, so it's not about long-term solutions. It's, let's try this and see what happens. Let's try that, see what happens. But it's asking artists and giving them permission to take risks and look at their community as a venue for their creative expression. Now, I know the parallel in the magazine that we publish. If I give the writer a book and say, can you do a book review? And they go, yeah, I could do that. It's a job. I can do that. Sure. Give me the book. I'll write it up. But if I ask a writer, what do you want to write about? Here's some money. Go do that. Do you see the difference? Now I'm tapping into the artist's passion, what they want to do. And I think if you can find your passion as an artist and get supported to try those things out in the community, not just in your studio, but in the community with audiences you want to reach. And I can tell you, every space comes with an audience. So if you're trying to reach kids, there are certain places you would go. If you're trying to reach seniors, there are certain places. So it is like computer dating. There's this mixing and matching. What kind of artists could match up with these? And to be a connector for artists with places and communities and give them a little bit of seed money, be surprised how far they will go with a little bit of encouragement and that stamp of, we want you to do that. The other thing that hasn't been talked about is the media. The extent to which public art gets media attention over art that happens in a gallery or in a theater, it's tenfold, 100-fold. It's because of the mass awareness of, because the media, it wants to know about things that are happening out on the street. And if you do a public art project and you don't think the media is paying attention, call up the TV station and ask them, what's going on? I've seen these artists painting the street over here, and there's a bunch of kids out. I don't know what, can you tell me what? They'll send a camera crew over right away. So I've tried that, it works. You don't have to tell me it had anything to do with it. But it's the fact that that media attention now is drawing attention to your community and the things that are happening there. Why is it doing that? And can that be a good thing? And I'm not saying I have the answer to what your identity is or how your geographic location should be mined for the kind of cultural or creative industries that you create here. But if you ask the creative industry that's already here, to ask them, what do they want to do and who do they want to do it for, and what would they like to do to change it? And if you can create some kind of resource to help them pursue their passion, you will be surprised, I think, at what results from just that. And if you take stock of what those things are, what works, let's do more of that. What doesn't work, okay, we're not going to do any more of that. It becomes a planning tool all by itself.
For me, I live in a risk-averse environment. If anyone's in public, risk is it's also a really subjective point of view. But within city government, it's the number one thing I have to contend with all the time, which is how can I get this measure achieved without criticism, either from council, mayor, or press. The strategy that's been taken up by the city coordinator's office, I think, is really interesting, and when I describe it to people, it's actually helped. So within the city coordinator, since it's really the CEO of the city, and we work with every single department, what we don't have to do is answer to another department's goals. So we're not measured and we're not accountable to other places in the city. And the city coordinator's office's goals is to facilitate within the city. So there are my equivalents in sustainability who go out and consult within the city enterprise around ecology and economy and sustainability. There's another one that deals with business process improvement, looking at the processes that are within the city and how to improve them so that the customer at the end, the citizen customer is served and not hindered. And those conversations have actually allowed us to break down some of the systems with which we work in, because in a highly bureaucratized process, you lose track of why you're doing things and what you do, because we're all broken up into functions. And so it actually has begun to grease some wheels and ideas, and the mayor is extraordinarily interested in innovation. So he's forcing collaboration at one level, and the city coordinator is providing this service on another level as people lose staff. So strategically, he's allowing this expertise to be there and for us to be free enough to actually go out and provide it. So it's very interesting, and I think that from a systems point of view, risk is about evolution.
One of the questions was asked is how does the city get more engaged in the arts community? I guess, I'm Dennis Egan, I'm the mayor in Illinois. And I would say that you've got the city planner, you have HRA director, you have a city council member, you've got the mayor here. We welcome the arts community and want to continue to help it grow. I would put out the challenge to say, give us some ideas on how we can better engage and grow and participate in the arts community. And look look at a big project. What if we tried to work with that vacant lot across from Freedom gas station and do a sculpture garden there until something develops there? But I think there are some ideas out there that I'm sure there are several of us. I can't speak for the entire city council, but we want to be engaged, and we've got staff, our staff here, and council members. So I guess the challenge I would say is help us look at some things differently than that.
Reach out to the politician.
Well, it sounds like you do have the next step. And we're a resource to a community like this. Okay, but you're talking about some time that it takes to maybe look at all of the options. That site might be good for certain things, but not good for others. So again, it's looking at what are the outcomes? What would success look like? Is it about serving the community? Is it about bringing more people into the community? Those goals and objectives, those criteria would inform why you'd go and put resources into that versus this over here. So I'm suggesting that you need help with the next step, which is a little bit of analysis and collection of what is the criteria by which you would say, if we're going to do a project or lots of projects going forward, these are the things that we're concerned about. These are the top priorities that we need to address. And like I said before, if you look at the larger goals of the city, what is it trying to do? You know, is it trying to grow business? Is it trying to become an arts town? What are those goals? And if you can identify them, and then you can look at where are the points of entry and access into the city, where are the points where people want to gather, as opposed to try and create a gathering place where people don't really want to go. All of those things need to be addressed. And you could come up with a plan and a few strategic goals that look like those are high priority items because they rose to the top in terms of all of these criteria that we've established. And there needs to be a shared consensus about those. So if you don't agree those are the top priorities with you, then we already have an issue about forging consensus about what those are. But I'd be glad to work with you. And I know there's probably other people who have some of those skills. But let me know when, and I'll come back.
Yeah. All right. With that, I'd like to thank the panelists, Carolyn and Robert. Thank you for the use of your facility. John, thank you for the invitation. This began as an idea, continues as an idea, and critical dialogue. So thank you again. And thank you all.
Again, I want to thank our guests. That this is the first in a series of these kinds of dialogues. We intend to make this more of a continuous learning experience, an idea exchange opportunity. Please sign up in the back if you would like to receive a copy of the Red Wing Creative Economy Project report, which will be available after September 1st. And again, that's part of the Idea Slam initiative. And I should point out who the financial contributors to that project include the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, the Anderson Center, the Red Wing Arts Association, the Sheldon Theater, ArtReach. I think it's about that. So we have a lot of assets in the community already. I think a lot of it kind of comes down to how do we leverage these assets? How do we document these assets? How do we take inventory of these assets? Because we all know Red Wing's got a lot going for it. I mean, every one of us in this room recognize that Red Wing is unique. And because it is unique, we can leverage that. We can make some money. So anyways, again, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Small technical glitch, we had no problem at all. We did a wonderful job talking over the blue screen. Yes. And so we'll get it later. And if you want a copy of the PowerPoint presentation or a Google's presentation, please track me down and I'll make sure you get it. So thanks again.